Welcome back to Ignite the Fire, where we dive into messages from Flame Community Church.
Right.
And this week, we're going to be unpacking a message from John, our new minister in training.
Yes.
And he really had us thinking about what it means to be present and active in our faith.
It was interesting how he started, wasn't it? I mean, with coffee and biscuits.
Right.
Who does that?
Yeah. It was clever, though, how he used that
Yeah.
to kind of transition into talk about why we actually come to church.
Yeah.
And he acknowledged that there are a lot of reasons, like habit, maybe a little nudge from God,
Right.
but ultimately it's about seeking something more.
Yeah, and he was pointing out that without Jesus, there wouldn't be a church to come to in the first place.
Right.
He referenced 1 John chapter 1, verse 3, where it talks about the fellowship we have with God
Yes.
and with each other because of Jesus.
Yes. It made me think about my own reasons for being a part of Flame.
Right.
What about you? What resonated with you about that idea of coming to Jesus?
Well, he mentioned finding a spiritual home, and I think that's something a lot of people struggle with,
Yeah.
We might bounce around different churches or denominations,
Right.
but ultimately it's about finding a place where you feel connected to God and to a community of believers.
It's not about the building or the style of worship. It's
Right.
about that shared faith in Jesus.
Exactly. And then he kind of introduced his theme, this come, listen, go.
Yeah.
It's like a roadmap for how we should approach our faith journey.
Let's break down each of those points, starting with come.
Okay.
And he used that story from the Gospel of John, where Jesus invites those disciples to, come and see where he lives.
Yes.
It just struck me how simple the invitation was.
Yeah.
No strings attached.
Right. He emphasized that it's the same for us today,
Yeah.
Jesus invites us just as we are, no prerequisites. There's
Yeah.
no need to get our lives perfect first.
Right. And he even compared it to, a save the date for a
Yeah.
wedding. You might not know all the details yet,
Yeah.
but you save the date because you're open to the possibility of attending.
I like how he pointed out that we can't just ignore the invitation.
Right.
We have to actively choose to accept it or decline it.
Right.
And it kind of made me think, have I truly accepted Jesus' invitation to come and follow him?
That's such a good point. And he was clear that just showing up at church doesn't automatically make you a Christian.
Right.
It's about actively choosing to follow Jesus.
Yeah. And following Jesus starts with listening to his message.
Right.
Which brings us to the second part, listen.
And I love the way he highlighted that sometimes we think we're listening, but we're actually missing the point entirely.
Yeah.
He told that story about mishearing peacemakers as cheesemakers.
Oh, that was so funny.
I know.
But it was a great way to illustrate how easy it is to get distracted.
Right.
Or misinterpret things, even in our faith.
It happens in everyday life too, right?
Oh.
We think we're listening to someone, but our minds are somewhere else. Completely.
All the time.
Yeah.
It's true. And he was really stressing that we need to be intentional about listening to Jesus.
Yeah.
Not just passively hearing words, but actively trying to understand their meaning
Yeah.
and apply them to our lives.
And I use the example of the disciples asking Jesus to explain the parable of the sower.
Right.
Even those closest to Jesus needed clarification sometimes.
Exactly.
So it's okay for us to ask questions too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
To wrestle with these ideas
Yes.
and seek understanding.
In fact, he said that, asking those big questions like, why are we here?
Yeah.
What's at the point of it all? That's a sign that we're engaging with our faith on a deeper level.
I like that.
Me too.
So we come to Jesus by accepting his invitation.
Right.
We listen by actively seeking to understand his message.
Yes.
But it doesn't end there, does it? There's the third part to this.
Go. That's where the real challenge comes in.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just sit in the pews and soak it all in.
Right.
We're called to take what we've learned and share it with the world.
I love the analogy he used about finding space in primary school.
Oh, yeah.
He said he would just stand still
Uh-huh.
and let everyone else move around him.
It was funny, but also a powerful reminder that going doesn't always have to be this grand, dramatic gesture.
Right.
It can be as simple as living out our faith in our everyday lives, right where we are.
Right. He reminded us that the Great Commission, the call to go and make disciples of all nations
Yeah.
applies to all of us.
And the most effective way to share our faith is through our personal stories.
Being a witness,
Mm.
sharing how Jesus has impacted our life.
Exactly, because people can connect with that. They want to know how faith makes a tangible difference in our lives.
And he was very adamant that personal testimony is far more powerful than simply regurgitating Bible verses
Well, yeah, for sure.
or theological concepts.
It's about being able to say, this is how Jesus has changed my life, and he can do the same for you.
Right.
Which I think leads us nicely into the next part of his message, but we'll dive into that after a quick break.
Okay, sounds good. So we've talked about come and listen, and now we're on to go. Where does John take us from here?
This is where he gets into the idea of being a witness. Like, it's not enough to just know about Jesus.
Right.
We're called to share that knowledge with others.
Yeah, he actually used the example of a witness in a courtroom.
Right?
They can't just rely on hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
They have to share what they personally know to be true.
That's what makes personal testimony so powerful. When we share our own experiences of how Jesus has changed us, it resonates with people in a way that simply quoting scripture might not.
It's about being real, admitting that we're not perfect, but showing how Jesus has impacted our lives despite our imperfections.
Right, and he tied that back to the idea of come. Remember when he talked about people coming to church for different reasons?
Yeah, like maybe they were invited by a friend or they're just curious about what it's all about.
Well, John said that we are often the way people meet Jesus. We might be the only representation of Christianity that someone encounters.
Wow, that's a huge responsibility.
It is, but it's also a privilege, because when we live out our faith authentically, we can be a powerful witness for Christ.
So how does John suggest we go about this going? Do we all need to become missionaries or street preachers?
Not necessarily. Remember his analogy about finding space in primary school?
Mm-hmm.
He said going can simply mean being present where we are, living out our faith in our everyday interactions.
So it's less about geography and more about our attitude and actions.
Exactly. It's about being kind to the cashier at the grocery store, or lending a listening ear to a friend who's struggling, or even just choosing to respond to a difficult situation with grace instead of anger.
Those are all things we can do no matter where we are or what our circumstances are.
Right. And John emphasized that we shouldn't get bogged down trying to predict the future or figure out the timeline of end times events. Our focus should be on sharing the gospel with those around us right now.
He even quoted that passage from Acts where the disciples ask Jesus about restoring Israel's kingdom. And Jesus essentially tells them to focus on being his witnesses.
It's a good reminder that we're not called to be fortune tellers. We're called to be disciples.
So we start by accepting Jesus' invitation to come. We deepen our understanding by actively listening, and we put our faith into action by going. It's like a continuous cycle.
Exactly. And John reminded us that God doesn't expect us to be perfect. He knows we'll stumble and make mistakes.
Which is where grace comes in, right? He quoted Romans chapter 8, where Paul talks about how we're set free from sin and death through Christ.
It's such a powerful message of freedom. We don't have to earn our salvation. It's a gift freely given through Jesus.
But that doesn't mean we just sit back and do nothing, right? John made it clear that while we can't earn our salvation, we're called to live a life that reflects our gratitude for that gift.
It's about striving to be more like Jesus, allowing his love and grace to shine through us in everything we do.
John's sermon was really inspiring. But for someone who might be feeling overwhelmed by this call to go, where do they even begin?
He offered some practical advice, saying that it starts with small steps. It could be something as simple as offering a helping hand to a neighbor, or maybe inviting someone to church with you.
Those small acts of kindness can plant seeds of faith, can't they?
Absolutely. And you never know how God might use those seemingly insignificant actions to change someone's life.
John's message was a powerful reminder that Christianity is more than just a set of beliefs. It's a way of life.
It's a way of life that involves constantly coming back to Jesus, listening to his message, and then going out and sharing it with the world, starting right where we are.
So for our listeners, what do you think is the most important takeaway from John's message?
I think it's the reminder that each of us has a role to play in sharing the good news of Jesus. We don't need to be theologians or have all the answers. We just need to be willing to share our own experiences of how Jesus has touched our lives.
And that starts with cultivating a deeper connection with Jesus ourselves, through prayer, through studying scripture, and through being present in our faith community.
It's an ongoing journey, and there's always more to learn and experience.
Well said. And if any of our listeners are looking for a place to start that journey, we encourage you to come and visit Flame Community Church. You can find Flame Community Church online at website address. And you can also find us on Facebook and YouTube.
We post all of John's sermons online, so even if you can't make it to a service in person,
Right.
you can still hear his messages.
And if you were with us last week, you'll remember we were talking about finding that balance between exploring our faith on a personal level
Yes.
and also sharing it with others. And John's sermon this week really built on that, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
He took those concepts of come, listen, go, and showed us how they work together to create this beautiful cycle of spiritual growth and outreach.
He reminded us that coming to Jesus isn't a one-time event.
Right.
It's an ongoing process of seeking, learning, and growing closer to him.
And as we listen to his teachings and allow them to transform us,
Yeah.
it naturally overflows into our interactions with the world around us. It's like we become these walking, talking testaments to the power of faith.
And it all starts with that personal connection with Jesus, right?
Yeah.
John emphasized that our personal testimonies are what truly resonate with people.
Because it's one thing to hear about Jesus in a theoretical sense, but it's quite another to see how his love and grace have actually impacted someone's life. That's what makes people sit up and take notice.
And for someone who might be thinking, well, my life isn't that remarkable, I haven't had some dramatic conversion experience, what would you say to them?
I'd say that every story is unique and valuable. It's not about having the most dramatic or entertaining story. It's about sharing authentically from your own experience. Maybe you've experienced healing in a relationship, or maybe you found peace in the midst of a storm. Whatever it is, your story has the power to touch someone's heart.
And it's about being relatable, isn't it?
Mhm.
Admitting that we don't have it all figured out, that we still make mistakes, but showing how Jesus has helped us through those challenges.
It's what makes our faith believable. People aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for hope. And when we can share our stories of how Jesus has brought hope into our own lives, it gives them permission to believe that he can do the same for them.
So if you're listening to this and you're feeling inspired to share your faith, but you're not sure where to start, what advice would you give?
Start small. It could be simply offering a word of encouragement to a coworker who's having a tough day, or maybe inviting a friend to church with you. You don't have to have all the answers. Just be willing to share your own experience and let God do the rest.
John reminded us that God doesn't expect perfection from us. He just wants us to be willing vessels.
And he promised to equip us for the task. He'll give us the words to say, the opportunities to share, and the courage to step out in faith.
So to wrap up this week's deep dive, I think the key takeaway is that living out our faith is an ongoing journey of coming to Jesus, listening to his message, and then going out and sharing it with the world.
And it's a journey that's filled with joy, purpose, and the incredible privilege of being a part of something much bigger than ourselves.
If you'd like to hear John's sermon in its entirety, you can find it on Flame Community Church's Facebook, YouTube, or website.
We hope you'll join us again next week as we dive into another message from Flame.
God bless. See you next week.